But it's really this whole debate about intellectual property, copyright, who owns the content. And it's become such a divisive, which I didn't think it would become a divisive issue, but it is a divisive issue. People become so, I don't know why, but they get so aggravated when I say to them, actually, no, you are stealing other people's content. Oh, no, we don't. Oh, yes, you are stealing other people's content. And I think there are lots of different reasons, but we've even seen that with politics right now, that this aggressive push towards deregulation, and to our shock, and again, that's not being political, but even the Labour government in the UK, a government that normally associated with extra regulations, etc., they're trying now, apparently, it seems, that they want to weaken our copyright laws in the UK, even though we've never had issues with copyright laws in the UK. We've always been the world leader in the creative industry. We never had problems there. But now, even the Labour Party now, or the Labour government, is capitulating to the tech bros. This is really bad, isn't it?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think the government has, they want to put the UK as this sort of centre of excellence and leadership in AI. And they are being told by the American tech companies who have been lobbying them in the background very, very aggressively that, the most important thing we have to do is to weaken our copyright laws. And they sort of see the dollar signs, or pound signs maybe, and kind of think, well, we don't really have any choice. This is what we need to do in order to support the AI industry in the UK. On the other hand, we've got a very, rich creative industry in the UK, have done for a long time, which is worth a huge amount of our economy. Yeah. So those things have to be balanced against each other. So I see the kind of balancing out there. But what I don't like so much is that it's being kind of framed in what I think is a slightly disingenuous way. They say, or if you look at the language of this consultation that's going on at the moment, or if you look at what has been said in the AI Opportunities Action Plan, there's a framing that copyright law is unclear as applies to AI in the UK. And whilst AI is a different use of copyright works to other things before, I should specifically say generative AI is different to other uses of copyright works. The law in the UK is not very uncertain. We basically have any use of copyright works, including any form of copying of them, or making derivative works and so on, is an infringement of copyright in that work. And we have quite a narrow set of exclusions to that. And it's quite difficult to fit AI training into any of those exclusions, generative AI training. So it seems fairly clear that, to me at least, that training a generative AI model on copyright works is copyright infringement. And it's in contrast to, and I think, this language of uncertainty and why, the idea that it's uncertain and it needs clarifying maybe comes a little bit from the situation in the US where things are more uncertain because they have this fair use concept, and fair use is actually kind of much more open-ended than our exclusions. So they sort of say, and that's why we have tons of litigation. There's probably nearly 40 lawsuits now against generative AI companies for training on copyright works. And, there are arguments on both sides. I still personally, might want to get into this at some point, but I personally still believe that it's not fair use and it is still a copyright infringement, even in the US. I'm not a US lawyer though, but looking at the UK situation, it seems more black and white. Yeah. And I think it's just a way of framing it and I think the idea is you frame the current situation as uncertain, frame the kind of the other extreme, which is that, like, you just say, okay, anyone can use anything for training. You frame that as probably bad as well, but you say that there must be the middle ground, which is where you allow people to use copyright works for training, but you provide them with an opt-out. You say that, well, that's obviously a happy medium, that's good for everyone. And that's kind of the way it's been pushed, but I don't actually think that's true. I think the proposed changes do nothing but weaken copyright law and potentially really harm the creative industries. And I don't really know if there's anything much to be gained from it.
And you say the framing. So, because interestingly, if people try to frame a narrative, then they have to convince somebody to push for that narrative to take place. So for example, let's say, again, in politics, like people try to push a particular narrative so that they can vote for a particular government, etc. But now that we actually have this government, which has the power to say, actually, no, we don't think this is the right thing. So who benefits from this narrative? Because the government obviously knows, I hope that they do know that our copyright laws in the UK, at least, is pretty solid. It has been. And somebody is trying to convince them, actually, no, we need to kind of, weaken it. But we're not in any election year. So it's not like they can go back to us, the voters, and say, hey, look, we've created this amazing thing, vote for us. It just feels to be, it's like no one is benefiting from it. So why are they doing this?
Well, they don't want massive. There is still a political angle to it. They don't want to have massive pushback. They don't want to sort of be seen as doing something without asking people, and just throwing people under the bus, throwing the creative industry under. They don't want to be seen as doing that. So the way that they're doing it is that they're running a consultation, which, by the way, we're preparing a response to that consultation at the moment.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
So they're going to put this consultation out so that they can say that they've done it. And I really hope they will listen to the responses of that consultation, because I think they'll be getting a lot of responses, both from creative industries and even from people working more on the tech side, which would include you and me, saying that, in fact, we don't think these suggestions are the right way forward. But then they want to do the consultation so they can say they've done it, but then they want to frame it. It's psychological anchoring, where you anchor people's expectations in one place, and then you say, but we're offering this brilliant solution where we do a text and data mining exception with an opt-out provision. And because you anchored it in that way, people will be more likely to respond positively to it. And, it's fairly well written. This, if you didn't think about it too much, and you weren't aware of the implications, you could be convinced by the way they've written it that this is a great compromise for everyone. But that's not how I see it.
So for those who basically believe that this is the right way forward, and because one of the typical arguments that I see quite commonly on LinkedIn and everywhere else, especially some of the VCs in Silicon Valley, right? They say, well, actually, this is the best way for us to train AI, etc. Now, from the mathematical perspective, feel free to call the bullshit. I think you're qualified to kind of educate people to say, actually, no, that's not true. I'll go for it. Because I'm not a mathematician. I've got mathematicians working with me, but I'd rather hear it from the horse's mouth.
Well, the very large scale neural networks, very large scale language models that we have at the moment, they are very data hungry. And, it does seem to be that by feeding these internet scale data sets to them, you can get the best performance out of them. And that's kind of what OpenAI has been doing, and everyone since the kind of arms race began, that's what everyone has been doing. And of course, those companies would like to be told that they're free to use any data that they like. That's convenient for them. And that may be true with the current architectures, but we're also seeing massive improvements where much smaller models are capable of doing things that larger models can. And I think over time we'll find that they'll become much more data efficient as well. And we'll actually end up in a situation where quality of data is as important, or potentially much more important than the quantity of data.
Yeah.
And one of the big things that makes me think that is that if you think of these kind of if you think of current large language models, they're quite blunt instruments. They're quite, they work brilliantly well at certain things. I'm not diminishing their utility, but they require huge amounts of data to do quite simple things. Whereas a human, we don't need much. We consume far, far, far less data to perform any particular task, and we do it with far, far, far higher reliability and, in a just a better way. And I think that whilst I don't think I think AI is absolutely miles away from human intelligence, and will be for the foreseeable future. I think that as the models become smarter, we get better at building them, better architectures, and bringing in other ideas rather than just the transformer deep learning. we'll actually find that data efficiency can be improved, and then we won't need to have thrown people under the bus and all of this stuff. So it may slow, in the short term, it might slow things down, slow down some development, but it'll actually direct development in a better direction, which is why I hope we stand by our copyright laws. And I hope in the US, these fair use cases start coming down in the favor of creatives, which is a bigger, who knows if that's going to happen or not, but I hope that is the case. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm making this. I don't think it's going to happen in the US. It's way too, the level of influence that Silicon Valley has on Trump, it's really unprecedented. I can't disagree with the arguments that I'm seeing, from analysts and people like that that believe very strongly that effectively it's the tech oligarchs that are going to be running the administration, not Donald Trump. So for me, I think that's why the point I always like to make, I've been making recently in here, that we are, as people, we are on our own, because I don't think government's going to deliver what we need them to deliver. And certainly the Americans are going to do it. The corporations are going to do it. So we have to kind of look for an alternative path, which brings me very nicely, maybe I'm being naive, is Europe potentially the alternative path? Of course, politically, Europe is still not in a very good place. We've got the new Nazi groups growing in Germany, which is kind of like, what in the hell, right? But that's putting that aside. Is Europe potentially the alternative path? Could Europe potentially stand up and say, well, actually, we're going to prioritize regulation, and we're going to prove that regulation does not stifle innovation? Is that a possibility, do you reckon?
Yeah, the EU sort of acts as a counterweight. It has for a long time in a lot of settings as a counterweight to kind of American sort of accelerationism and things. There's a, you'll see a lot of people who say that, America innovates, Europe regulates, and in a kind of derogatory way to the EU. But actually, the regulations the EU have, they are quite fragmented, and there are it's a very difficult thing to do what they're trying to do. But ultimately, they're standing up for people's rights and their values. And I think that that's really important that someone's doing it. The EU is probably the only body big enough to even have a chance of doing that successfully in the current climate. And I'm glad that they're doing it. And I think, the UK it will be tempted to go along with the US to sort of, so that companies will build data centers in the UK rather than in Europe and all this sort of stuff. But I think they really need to keep an eye on that and sort of think what kind of country do we want to be?
Yeah.
Do we want to throw our values under the bus in order for economic growth? And I think, I'm not saying we necessarily have to align completely with the EU. We have had Brexit for better or for worse, so we don't have to do exactly what they do. But I don't think we should be dismissing the idea of regulation of AI in particular. And for what it's worth, I think the AI Act actually has a lot of good things about it. I think it's actually really quite well thought out, even though there are some definitional issues and perhaps a few points which are going to be difficult to implement. It actually probably gets it right in a lot of other ways.
Yeah, the thing is, the problem with Europe in general, that a lot of the regulation over history, I'm not talking about the AI Act specifically, but as you said, that they like to stand against the US out of principle. So it can be a bit ideological sometimes, like some of the regulations that they come up with, it can be a bit ridiculous. Like, I think, I'm not sure how true that is, because I'm not a lawyer, but I've seen people complaining in Europe that apparently they believe that certain regulations would apply if you build an AI model of a particular size. So I can't remember the exact size, but if it's like, let's say if it's 1 trillion parameters or something, right? Something like that. Then the regulations apply to that. But if it's anything smaller than that, then it doesn't. Which to me, this is the dumbest thing I've ever seen in the world of AI, because you don't need huge AI models to cause havoc. Cambridge Analytica didn't use a 1 trillion parameter AI model to create the shenanigans that they created. And to me, I feel this is definitely ideological. They say, we want to go after the big AI companies and the big models. I'm thinking, but see, that is silly. You need to focus on this is definitely ideological. You should look at the power of the AI model, no matter what the size is, because you can, like I said, you can create a small model that is really, really powerful.
I mean, that particular, so that's to do with the systemic risk category.
Yes.
So so obviously we've got different risk categories in the AI Act, and we've got no risk, high risk, and we've got this systemic risk, and it's not the only criteria. So you can't. It's not that if a model is below a certain size, it won't be systemic risk. There are other ways you can fall into that category, but it's actually so it's any model which during training uses more than 10 to the 25 flops,
right?
Will automatically go into the systemic risk category. And I mean, it's a pretty blunt way of categorizing things. And as you say, as AI models get smarter, it's going to be possible to train far, far, far more dangerous and advanced models with far fewer operations than that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's a bit of a strange one. Although actually, other places where they have tried to regulate, very powerful AI models, including in California, they do have similar cutoffs like that. It does seem to be like broadly used as I think because LLMs in their current situation they are kind of dependent on scale. Just you sort of can, you almost can make a bit of you can certainly draw a correlation between model size and capability. However, I'm already hearing that we're seeing far, far smaller models being more capable than big models. So even now, which is a few months after these regulations were created, it probably doesn't really hold. So and in fact it's even come in. The most recent place we've seen that sort of threshold put in is where the US has just so Biden on his way out of the door has introduced export controls on AI technology created in the US, which includes things like NVIDIA chips and stuff, but also models which were trained in the US, all models which were trained on US hardware, which actually, when you think about it, is probably going to include kind of everything. And they're saying that, and they're including at the moment, they're saying models with more than 10 to the 26 flops. So they're saying models over this size, we're going to set controls so you can't move them into countries you can't host these models or the parameters of these models in countries which the US sees as unfriendly or, not top tier. The UK is a top tier country. Most of the EU is top tier, but not all of it. So you're going to have this weird situation where the UK, there's going to be these sort of advanced models. Where the US says you can't move from, say, Germany to somewhere in Eastern Europe, but the EU says it has to be free trade between these countries, and you're going to have all sorts of legal issues around that.
Okay, I actually wasn't aware of this. I mean, but why? What's the logic behind that? How does that even benefit America?
Well, America wants to stay ahead of other countries in providing AI models. They don't want their intellectual property, basically their model weights, falling into the hands of China or Russia and things like that. So they're going to basically put restrictions on what you can do with that. So they're going to prevent models from going into those countries. I mean, there's export controls on lots and lots of things, but usually it's, and there's usually a national security reason. You're not allowed to, if you invent some sort of new military hardware in the US, you're not allowed to just go and sell it into, the Middle East, like without getting it government cleared. This type of export control that the government's doing on AI there's a bit of that to it, but it's not really about national security. It's more about national dominance. They really they feel that they're in competition, particularly with China. Yeah. I mean, we're already, and they're not there's reports that, the Chinese military is using llama models now. So that's sort of shows that the kind of thing they don't want to happen with more advanced models.
But there's also, I mean, there's a massive rise of open source LLMs as well. I mean, it's like literally there are thousands of them everywhere. So it's silly. I mean, in fact, going back to the points, in terms of the copyright and size of the models and stuff. In fact, what we're seeing from my company's point of view, that actually enterprises and businesses, they're not seeing value in the LLMs at all anymore. Actually, to be honest with you, I don't think, certainly the ones I speak to, they're excited about it. They say, okay, it's really amazing, it's powerful, etc. But it always comes back to the ROI, right? It's like the amount of money that they have to spend, to just host these things and to run these things. But the return on that investment to them is just not good enough. Hence the rise of the smaller language models that are more specialized and more verticalized, etc. And this is the thing that I always push for. I'm saying to people that, again, to me, it's history repeating itself, because when you see some of the examples that people even see, on YouTube and LinkedIn, etc., say, "Oh, how amazing these LLMs are! It can, I don't know, it can book my holidays, right? Or it can provide me with whatever, cool recipes that I've never thought about." Now, this is not bad, but as an investor, if you spent billions and billions and billions on these things, I think the more, like, you would want something a little bit more than recipes and holiday booking. You know what I mean? And this reminds me so much of IBM. I don't know if you remember with IBM Watson years ago. It was exactly the same sort of thing, because IBM invested ridiculous amount of money on Watson, and I think, if I remember correctly, one of the most reliable applications that people came up with was recipes, and the shareholders were like, "Get the fuck out of here!" It's like, we need to spend all that money so people can do bloody recipes, and that kind of almost was the end of Watson. And I'm thinking, is that the same gonna potentially could happen here? It's like the investors at some point will be like, "All right, guys, what's going on?" You've got a company like DeepMind that spent probably a fraction of that, and they built AlphaFold, which is truly revolutionary. And for me, I guess as a scientist, I always push for, like, no, how about if we actually build AI models, not necessarily just LLMs? Like, there are gazillions of models out there. How about if we actually put the money and focus on things like that, right? Things that actually can revolutionize medicine, revolutionize scientific research, etc. There's so much we can do with this, and LLMs are great, but it's like they seem to have just sucked all the attention, all the cash. And the return is what? Booking holidays? Are you for real?
Yeah. This is a really good point. And LLMs, the thing that they have achieved, which is what's really impressive about them, is that they've provided us with a fairly useful natural language interface to a computer. And absolutely, I think that's we haven't had that before, and that unlocks loads of things. So LLMs, for that reason, are always going to be part of the conversation. Now, whether or not it's the current sort of paradigm of transformers and things to create LLMs, I'm not sure, but there will always we'll need some language model as an interface. But then I think as you say, I don't think in itself that creates enough return on the investment for companies like OpenAI and Anthropic and so on. So they have to think of other ways other sort of USPs of ways that they can extract value from these things. And there are a few issues. First of all, they are quite unreliable in that hallucinations are not a solved problem, and it means that you can't use them for a lot of things. You talk about recipes there, but even with recipes, there were cases where Google's AI has been telling people to cook deadly mushrooms and things that kind of went viral. Yeah. So you can't. I think as soon as you start outsourcing a deeper, like more things to the LLM itself, you're going to run into problems. They're not reliable enough, particularly, and not an enterprise. People might use them for their own personal stuff, and might kind of write a little story for you or do something fun, and that's fine. But that's just a toy. If you want it to be useful in enterprise settings, they have to be a lot more reliable.
Yeah,
and they can be. There are things you can do. You can anchor them into kind of workflows with kind of lots of mitigating switches and things that'll tell it to stop if something doesn't seem to be working. But overall, they're not that trustworthy. Whereas more sort of, as you say, kind of more verticalized AI systems, which do certain thing very well, they're not trained on these enormous data sets usually. they're good at a specific thing, actually you can get a lot more value from that. So it might be that LLMs provide a language interface, but the actual hard work or the kind of serious work is done by other types of models, which are just more reliable.
You are listening to